The day she snapped at me across the conference table, I was mid-sentence, explaining why a flagged vendor had 4 aliases and a bankruptcy buried in Delaware. Mira leaned back, arms crossed like a reality show villain, and said loud enough for the interns to hear, "God, do you ever just approve things?" The room went quiet. That kind of quiet where even the air feels embarrassed. I didn't answer, just closed the file, tapped the table once, and stood up. "You want speed over security?" I asked, calm. "Let's see how fast negligence shows up in a deposition." It wasn't the first time she tried to undercut me, but it was the first time she got public about it. That was Mira Connors, new blood from some flash and dash SaaS startup, all slogans and shortcuts. She landed at Delver and Chase with the confidence of someone who'd never had to answer to an audit, immediately started gutting workflows she didn't understand. Her motto, she told the team at the first staff meeting, was, "Cut the anchors or sink with them." I knew which one she thought I was. But I wasn't just another paper pusher. For 10 years, I had been the unnamed backbone of our compliance system. Every vendor deal, every payment, every onboarding file, every legal doc passed through a validation protocol I'd built myself. It didn't just flag fraud, it predicted it, like a sixth sense baked into code. You couldn't bypass it unless you rewrote the system from scratch, and good luck doing that without blowing up procurement timelines. I wasn't in their marketing slides or town halls. But when deals went through, quietly, cleanly, securely, it was me. And Mira didn't like that. If you're listening to this and haven't subscribed yet, take a second to hit that button and like the video. It helps our team keep bringing these real stories forward. And believe me, this one's just getting started. Back to Mira. Her strategy was simple. Sideline me without the paperwork. Death by 1,000 meetings I wasn't invited to. She stopped looping me in on approvals. Claimed I was offboarding the legacy tools during leadership calls. But I saw the red flags stack up. New vendors popping up in the system without full credentialing. One had a fake website with stock photo employees and an address that mapped to a parking lot in Tallahassee. I flagged it. She overrode it. Told me flatly, "You worry too much." I wasn't worried. I was documenting. You see, Mira thought she was pushing around a bureaucrat. She didn't know she was poking the woman who wrote the compliance charter they were all still operating under. Clause 3.2, only I could issue final approval on any vendor contract over 100K. Clause 5.1, manual override required 2 named parties. Clause 6.4, tamper-evident logs written in immutable storage. She could ignore me in meetings, but she couldn't erase the architecture, and she never asked how deep it went. Still, she kept trying. Friday before the long weekend, I got a calendar removal notification for every compliance checkpoint call I ran. No explanation. When I asked her directly, she smiled and said, "You've earned a break. We're streamlining." The next morning, I got an email from IT, system access request revoked. No warning, no process, just gone. I made tea, then I made backups, because I knew what she was about to do and how hard it would crash when it hit the real world. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I'd seen Mira Connors before. Fresh title, fast talker, no depth perception. People like her think documents are obstacles. They forget documents remember. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to plead my case. All I had to do was wait. Monday morning hit like a slap in church. I pulled into the lot like usual. Same thermos, same parking spot, same mental checklist. Only difference? The badge reader blinked red. Not the lazy orange of a glitch. Solid, final red. No access. I tried again. Same result. I half laughed, half gritted my teeth. Maybe it was an error. Maybe some intern fat-fingered a system roll. Then I saw Mira through the glass, standing just inside the security vestibule like she'd been waiting. She didn't say, "Good morning." Didn't ask if I needed help. Just crossed her arms and said, "I'll just say you never showed up." No build-up, no paperwork. Just erasure. "You can't be serious," I said. My voice wasn't raised. It was quiet, flat. A warning tone, not a threat. Mira stepped closer, almost smug. "Without your name on the logs, none of it sticks," she said, brushing a hand through her hair like we were talking about filing errors, not livelihoods. "It's clearing your credentials. Legal's been briefed." I blinked. "They're okay with fabricated attendance records?" She didn't flinch. "They'll take my word over yours." I stared at her for a long second. I'd seen some real gall in this building, directors padding forecasts, VPs forgetting disclosures. But this was straight up Soviet tier revisionism. You realize those logs are immutable, I said. Audit trails don't care about your word. Mira smirked. They care about who signs off. You won't be around to object. I don't remember walking away. I just remember the feeling in my gut. Not rage, not panic, just this cold, clean click of understanding. Like a key turning in a lock I didn't realize she'd sealed behind me. I drove home without turning on the radio. No tears, no calls. Just white noise and long thoughts. By noon, I was officially gone. No exit interview, no statement. Not even a thanks for your service. HR sent a generic access privileges expired email to the department. My Slack account disappeared. My name vanished from the org chart, like I'd never been there. But here's the thing. Mira didn't just fire me. She severed the one person who understood the labyrinth she was stumbling through blindfolded. She thought she was trimming fat. What she did was cut out the compass. That validation system she was so eager to override, it was never just checkboxes and flags. I'd built in redundancy warnings, legacy vendor lineage, legal jurisdiction prompts, stuff that only surfaced when it needed to. But now, there was no one left to see the signals. And worse, she didn't know they existed. She thought compliance was a form. She didn't realize it was a living system, with me as the keeper. And what made it all so deliciously ironic? My final changes, the ones she never noticed, redirected every override attempt to a hidden backup log, off-network, time-stamped, tamper-proof, silent. She thought she was rewriting history. All she did was start a new chapter. I didn't contest anything. Didn't go to HR, didn't call legal. I didn't need to. Let her talk, let her bluff, let her bask in her own little power trip. Because while Mira was out there waving her authority around like a discount wand, I was holding the receipts. And the second her shiny shortcuts ran into the real-world brick wall of liability, every missing email, every ghost approval, every premature vendor checkmark she forced through without dual validation, it would all light up. She just didn't know it yet. HR didn't even have the decency to fake confusion. I showed up with my keycard still in hand, and Denise from HR, who once asked me to help her niece land an internship, just gave me that frozen smile like I was a ghost she'd been warned not to acknowledge. No exit paperwork, no offboarding checklist, just a printed envelope with my name spelled wrong and a "thank you for your time with Delver and Chase" card that looked like it came out of a clearance bin at CVS. No severance, no NDA, no meeting. It was like someone hit delete on a human being. But you can't delete architecture. See, Mira assumed this place ran on workflows, tasks, permissions, a flowchart she could redraw on a whiteboard with her favorite pastel marker. What she didn't realize was that the validation system she was now fumbling through wasn't plug and play. It was mine, every line of it. I'd built it over the years like a spider builds a web, incrementally, invisibly, with purpose. And when you remove the spider, the web doesn't work the same. Every vendor entry form had dynamic verification layers, flags that only triggered when something subtle was off, things you wouldn't see unless you'd watched enough scams in motion. I'd added logic traps too, revalidation clauses that required specific digital handshakes only I could issue. And a final layer? A kill switch that redirected high-risk approvals into a silent queue once my credentials were revoked. And guess what Mira had just done? Her grand plan to fast-track onboarding meant she was about to push contracts through a machine that would look functional, but inside, it was frozen, waiting, trapping every reckless click and every forged checkbox in a vault. They thought they could reassign my role. That's what the little Slack ping said. Temporary reassignment of compliance validation duties pending replacement. Cute. Like the role was a coat you could hand to the next intern who looked good in spreadsheets. They didn't even know the credentials were layered. They didn't realize that approvals required private key verification split across 2 encrypted channels, one routed through the corporate network, the other, a cold system hosted offsite, under my name. It wasn't about being irreplaceable. It was about being unreadable without the cipher. Mira didn't fire a cog. She fired the one person who knew which button not to press. And now she was in there, probably dragging vendor files into folders, checking boxes, patting herself on the back for moving fast. But the system was catching everything. watching. I didn't slam the door, didn't send any final email. No, you'll regret this speech. That's not my style. I walked out quiet, left my badge in the box, nodded once to the receptionist who pretended not to see me. I let the silence do the talking. Because silence has weight. It settles into the cracks of a company when the wrong person leaves. It makes people wonder if maybe, just maybe, they misunderstood who held the real power. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to retaliate. All I needed to do was let her hit send. Tuesday morning started with a vendor inquiry that should have never existed. I wasn't there to catch it, obviously, but the system was. First alert, a contract logged as approved with no metadata, no signature hash, no timestamp, just a name. Orin Logistics, LLC. Procurement flagged it immediately because, well, Orin Logistics doesn't exist. It used to. Folded 3 years ago after a fraud investigation. Mira's new streamlined approval process had waved it through like it was Amazon Prime. No verification, no flag. Second alert, West Vale Resources. Legit on paper, until someone in legal ran it through our jurisdictional filter. Banned in Texas and Nevada due to regulatory violations. Should have been blocked automatically. Should have been red flagged with a blinking warning about supplier restrictions. Instead, marked green. Approved. Routed. The problem with automating a system you don't understand is that you don't see what's missing. And what Mira never understood, what she never bothered to ask, was that most of my flags weren't visual. They were triggered in silence, logged in cold storage, locked behind layered checks. My interface didn't scream when something went wrong. It listened. It recorded. Quietly. By noon, procurement was emailing legal. Legal pinged IT. IT started poking around the back end, scratching their heads at ghost records they couldn't trace. Mira called it legacy noise, told them the system had artifacts from older files that needed a purge. That phrase alone, legacy noise, made half the risk team's stomachs turn. She was trying to erase the footprints before anyone figured out she was the one walking barefoot through a minefield. Then the invoices started bouncing. One from an internal contractor, then one from a government-linked vendor, both flagged for incorrect routing. The payment system kicked them back with generic codes. Finance escalated it. Mira told them to resubmit. They did. 2 more bounced, then another. 5 bounced invoices in a single day. That was when procurement paused. Not panicked, not shouting, just quiet. The kind of quiet that settles in when something's off. But nobody wants to be the first to say it out loud. Because if someone said it, they'd have to answer the next question. Who approved these? And nobody had an answer. The approval fields were blank. No digital signature, no credential hash, no record of a verification pathway. Just green lights, like someone flipped switches in a dark room, hoping no one would check which ones still worked. IT tried to trace the entries. They found dead trails, pseudo logins with no authentication logs. Mira told them to clear cache, which, if you know anything about enterprise systems, is like pouring bleach on a crime scene and calling it a cleaning service. But still, no one confronted her. Not yet. Because she was the manager now. She had the title, the authority, the lanyard with the shiny badge. And authority buys you a few days of doubt. It buys you silence. But that silence was already cracking. You could feel it in the way procurement triple-checked every file now. In the way legal started CCing directors instead of just pinging internal. In the way people opened their inboxes slower, like they were afraid of what might land next. No one said the word fraud, but it was hanging there. Unspoken. Heavy. Waiting for someone brave enough or desperate enough to break the spell. Thursday morning, the audit team cracked it wide open. It was supposed to be routine. Quarterly vendor sampling for one of our lower risk regions. External auditor hired by our client, not even internal. They were checking contract logs when they spotted something weird. An approval that didn't match the system pattern. Specifically, a vendor contract for a company called Lanceret Materials. On paper, everything looked in order. Approval signature, internal compliance check, even my initials in the footer. But when they pulled the digital trail, timestamps, key hashes, credential logs, it didn't match, not just a little off. Entirely faked. I never approved it. In fact, the logs showed I had rejected that vendor twice, weeks before Mira pulled her little erasure stunt. The flags were clear: bad insurance coverage, unverifiable warehouse location, and ownership that traced back to a holding shell in the Caymans. The kind of vendor that looks clean if you're skimming, but screams liability if you've spent a decade watching wolves walk in wearing sheep costumes. The auditor flagged it immediately, sent it back to legal with a note: approval trail mismatch. Investigate for potential forgery. That note hit legal's inbox at 9:42 a.m. By 10:03, legal had looped in the board liaison. By 10:17, someone pulled the vendor charter from the compliance vault. Clause 7.4b. Any deliberate falsification of compliance verification, including forged digital approvals or circumvention of credentialed checkpoints, constitutes individual liability and revokes indemnity protections. That clause was one of my additions. Slipped in after a scare 5 years ago when a junior exec tried to push a buddy's shell company through for a fake contract. I didn't make a big deal of it then. I just updated the policy and quietly embedded the clause into every standard agreement. Now it was about to matter. They traced the override. There it was, sitting in the back end like a red-handed ghost. Mira's temporary override credential applied at 1:24 a.m. on a Sunday. The system didn't allow night approvals unless dual authenticated, which Mira had bypassed using emergency override access. Something I'm guessing she didn't realize also got logged. In a separate off-site storage module, the one I'd built. They saw the name, they saw the time, they saw the system flag the action and bury it in the tamper log. And then they saw my prior rejection of that exact vendor with a date, a time, a detailed note, and an unbroken cryptographic signature. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a forged approval, a deliberate override, a personal liability event under binding policy. And the person who now held the weight of it? Mira Connors. That was the moment the tone shifted. Before, it was tension, mumbled doubts, puzzled stares at broken systems. Now, it was awareness, like someone flipped on a flashlight and everyone in the boardroom realized they weren't alone in the dark. They'd fired their insurance policy. The woman who wrote the structure, built the rails, warned them in silence, and left without slamming the door. And they let a shortcut artist scribble her name on something designed to explode the moment someone checked the wiring. And the explosion had just begun. Calls went out. Legal froze 3 more contracts. Finance reviewed outgoing payments for every vendor added post-termination. Procurement scrubbed every green light Mira had touched. Directors who hadn't spoken to me in years were suddenly whispering phrases like, "How bad could this get?" And, "Wait, who has access to the log vault?" Too late, they were finally seeing it. Not just the risk, but the reason I'd built it all that way. I wasn't trying to slow them down. I was trying to keep them upright. By Friday, they weren't just asking questions. They were unthreading a mess no one knew how to contain. The first hit came before 9 a.m. A certified letter hand-delivered to legal's desk from a federal subcontracting oversight body. A flagged vendor, Lancerit Materials, had reportedly submitted forged compliance credentials tied to a government-adjacent supply chain. The agency was opening an inquiry. They wanted internal records, full logs, every approval step tied to the vendor profile. And, this was the part that made legal's jaw tighten, they specifically requested the validation signature attributed to me. Problem was, I never signed it. By 10:30, a second letter landed. This time from a law firm representing a vendor Mira had fast-tracked just 2 weeks earlier. A vendor whose contract, it turned out, included terms that Mira's streamlined process had altered, terms that made Delver and Chase liable for breach. They claimed damages. They were suing. The third blow was the quietest. An email. No name, no return address that traced anywhere real. Just a subject line. Whistleblower disclosure, internal fraud. Attached were 22 PDFs, log extracts, approval chains, screenshots, encrypted audit trails. All from the cold storage vault Mira didn't know existed, the one that began capturing override attempts the second my admin rights were revoked. Each file was time-stamped, immutable, watermarked with internal routing IDs and key hashes. The source? Me. They didn't know it was me yet, but they knew it wasn't them. And buried halfway through the whistleblower packet was something else. An email Mira sent to HR the morning she had my badge revoked. No euphemisms, no couching, just raw arrogance in black and white. I'll just say she never showed up. Her logs don't matter without a witness. That email was read aloud during the emergency court hearing that afternoon. They say courtrooms are all about theatrics, objections, raised voices, cross-examinations. But this one didn't need volume, just silence. Because when those words came out, everyone stopped breathing. Her bluff collapsed in real time. The same tone she used to wave off warnings in the office was now hanging in a federal judge's hearing transcript. There was no denying it, no spinning it, no buzzwords or PowerPoint slides to distract from what it was. Intent. Deliberate removal of a compliance gatekeeper, fabricated absence, and a paper trail that remembered what Mira tried to erase. The judge didn't say much. He just looked over the rim of his glasses and said, "We'll need to see full internal audit logs before this proceeds further." Legal nodded, tight-lipped. The board? Some of them were already whispering. I wasn't in the room, but I didn't need to be. I know how these things move. When a company that big suddenly finds itself pinned between regulatory scrutiny, private lawsuits, and internal fraud exposure, it's not just about fixing the mistake. It's about surviving it. And Mira had just become the central character in a story no one wanted to be in. She could have asked. She could have reviewed. She could have read the damn policies. But no, she tried to erase the woman who built the system. She thought removing my name would remove the consequences. But I didn't need a name. I had the data, and data doesn't panic, doesn't lie, doesn't blink. It just waits for the right moment to speak. Monday started with a calendar block no one wanted to accept. 7:30 a.m., sharp, emergency board session. No remote logins, no assistants, just key executives, legal counsel, and Mira Connors, whose designer handbag looked like it weighed more than she did. The email subject line was sterile. Urgent, vendor compliance review plus legal risk summary. But everyone knew what it really meant. The walls were already closing in. Mira walked in trying to act unbothered, clicked her pen twice, sat too confidently for someone who just tanked procurement integrity in front of federal regulators. But you could smell the panic on her, the too perfect hair, the forced smirk, the way she snapped at the assistant who offered her coffee like it was poison. The chair opened the meeting with 3 words: "We have problems." Legal kicked off with the lightest bomb, a recap of Friday's whistleblower submission, then the letters from the federal agency, then the lawsuit from the vendor with altered terms, then the quote, her quote, read back into the room. "I'll just say she never showed up." Mira tried to spin, claimed the system was outdated, said the logging tools were overcomplicated and confusing, blamed IT for not streamlining things, even tried to nudge fault toward HR for failing to finalize my offboarding. She kept using phrases like operational debt and legacy exposure, like she was pitching a slide deck instead of explaining a criminally altered approval. Then it happened. A director leaned forward, one of the quiet ones, the kind that doesn't talk unless they're about to level you, and asked a single question. "Did you confirm the final compliance sign-off before pushing those contracts?" Mira hesitated. Just a beat. But in a room like that, 1 beat is too long. "Yes," she said. Everything was cleared through standard workflows. No one moved. Across the table, legal didn't speak, just slid a file folder forward. Inside, the actual approval record from the system. It was projected onto the screen for emphasis. It was blank. The section marked Final Compliance Verification. Authorized credential signature had no data, no name, no time, no override, nothing. Mira stared at it like she'd never seen it before. Maybe she hadn't. Maybe she was so sure she'd covered her tracks that she never thought anyone would check the backup vault. But here it was, cold, silent, absolute. The board didn't yell. No one pounded the table. No accusations, just silence, heavy, surgical, the kind that doesn't come from shock, but from calculation. They weren't even mad anymore. They were weighing costs, damage control, PR fallout, regulatory fines, how long they'd be under review, whether Mira's name could be scrubbed from decisions before filings went public, whether they could survive what she'd done by cutting her loose fast enough. That's when Mira started to speak again, trying to pivot, to redirect. But no one was listening. They were already in a different phase of the conversation now. She wasn't a leader in crisis anymore. She was the liability, the sunk cost, the person who had put 8 years of clean audit trails at risk because she thought she could shortcut a system built to be unshortenable. They didn't look at her when they made the decisions. They looked at the numbers. The room had turned, and she was already out of it. By Wednesday morning, the story broke wide. Delvar and Chase faces $8 in compliance violations. SEC signals formal review. The headline hit like a truck. They tried to keep it behind paywalls, but it spread fast. Leaked by someone inside, no doubt. Maybe a board member trying to distance themselves. Maybe an exec hoping to frame Mira as a rogue outlier before the fire spread. Didn't matter. The damage was already in motion. Within hours, 3 client contracts were paused. 2 pulled entirely. One of them had been with the firm for over a decade. Their email was short. Until this is resolved, we are halting all onboarding activity. Another asked directly if the audit failures would affect their compliance indemnity, because of course, Delvar had sold them that assurance based on my protocols. Now those protocols were in question. I watched it unfold from home, still logged into public filings, still monitoring the same systems I used to protect from the inside. Mira's name started trending, not in celebration, but in analysis. Every headline described her as former something, former manager, former compliance lead, former rising star. Her LinkedIn went dark by noon. By 6 p.m., it was official. An internal memo hit inboxes under the subject line, Organizational Update, Compliance Division. In the 3rd paragraph, right between the boilerplate language about structural accountability and renewed dedication to integrity, they announced her departure. Not a resignation, a termination, effective immediately. But the line that stopped me cold came further down. A single sentence buried in the legalese like someone whispered the truth through gritted teeth. We are reviewing all systems previously managed by critical regulatory control personnel. Critical regulatory control personnel. That was me. They didn't name me, of course. They never would, not publicly. But there it was, finally, etched into corporate record. An acknowledgement, not of loyalty, not of service, but of function, of weight. The thing I had always been, even when they called me slow, too cautious, too rigid. I wasn't a footnote anymore. Mira was. She'd once tried to turn me into a ghost, delete the logs, cut the name, say I never showed up. Now she was being erased, quietly, efficiently, the way companies do when they need to close the book without admitting the plot was real. But it was real. I had built that system. I had flagged the vendors. I had created the protections that were now, ironically, being used to purge the person who thought she could override them. I didn't feel vindicated. Not really. There was no parade, no apology, just the cold hum of recognition, finally delivered after the loss had already occurred. That phrase kept echoing. Critical regulatory control personnel. I never wanted fame. Never asked for titles or awards. I just wanted the truth to matter, for the systems to work, for the right people to be heard before the wrong ones broke everything. And now? Now the company was realizing too late that their quietest employee had been the one holding the last line of defense. Mira's name would fade. Her job title would be reassigned. Her choices buried under new policies. But that line in the memo? That would stay, and it would remind them, if they paid attention, that some systems are only silent until they're broken. Friday morning, the world kept spinning, but slower. Or maybe I just had the time now to notice. My inbox was calm, my phone silent, and my tea steeped to perfection. I sat by the window, sunlight breaking across the floorboards like a clean line through a dirty ledger. On screen, headline after headline chronicled Mira's unraveling. Audits expanded, partners interviewed, consultants speculating on how a process failure could expose $8 million in risk. They kept using that phrase, process failure, like the system had tripped on its own, like it hadn't been shoved by someone who thought she was too clever for consequences. I didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly, just right. The kind of right that settles in your bones when the noise dies down and the facts speak clearly, finally, without interruption. Then the phone rang. Unknown number. New York area code. I answered. Hi, is this Ms. Harper? My name's Riley. I'm with Garnet Equity Group. We're prepping for an IPO early next year. We've been following recent industry reports and, well, let's just say your name's come up in a lot of internal conversations. I said nothing, letting her fill the silence. She did. We're building out compliance architecture from the ground up. We need someone who understands layered systems, someone who knows how to prevent what happened at Delvar. We want clean logs, verifiable trail structures, proactive threat detection. We want someone who's been in the fire. Still, I said nothing. Are you available? I looked out the window, not at the trees, at the reflection in the glass, at the woman who'd once been dismissed as too cautious, too invisible, too legacy, the one who'd built systems not to be admired, but to endure. Then I smiled. Only if I keep full oversight. She laughed, nervous, relieved, maybe both. That's what we were hoping you'd say. I ended the call politely, didn't gloat, didn't mention what Mira had tried to do, didn't need to, because the industry already knew. The story had traveled farther than I had. An anonymous compliance officer who had quietly stitched a company together while louder people collected the credit. They all knew now who had protected the foundation and who tried to fake the bricks. Delvar had moved on. Mira had vanished, but the system remained. The log files stood, the override attempts, the fabricated approvals, the late-night tampering, all still there, etched into immutable history. And one simple phrase left behind like a signature in invisible ink. I'll just say she never showed. She thought no one would question it, that her voice would be louder than my absence. But she didn't understand the math of truth. She didn't know that every approval she forged left a fingerprint, every lie she told left a gap, and every system I built, it remembered. She thought they'd believe her. But the truth already had a witness, my documentation.